Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, Michael. I'm super excited to be here for the second time speaking at AXCON. I'm super happy to chat about design, compliance, and conformance. Yeah, can you all see my screen? Fine, just to make sure. I wanted to quick introduce myself. I'm Cynthia Romero. My pronouns are she and her. I am a light-skinned woman. I have a pixie haircut and black hair. Right now, I'm wearing a beige button-down shirt, and I have clear prescription glass. I am at my home office right now. I have lots of percussion instruments behind me and dog toys. Sorry about the mess. Today I work as a product designer on Pinterest on the design systems team. Besides, I am a Latina from Brazil. I am colorblind, I'm vegan, and I am a dog mom. And I just got my citizenship. Now I'm also an American citizen. Yeah, I'm still celebrating that. I wanted to quickly introduce the Pinterest design system, Gestalt. Why? Because I'll be sharing some examples. There are screenshots from our website. You can check Gestalt at gestalt.pinterest.systems. This slide shows an image composition of pins, components, design specs, such as pixel units. It's a screenshot from our website, and it tells a lot of the work that I do designing components. Today, I want you to leave from this talk with three takeaways. The first one is the purpose of accessibility compliance and conformance. The second one, we'll be talking about how to apply compliance and conformance into your design. And I'm going to give you some insights from work in progress framework I'm creating for accessibility, conformance, and compliance for Pinterest. And it's a work in progress, so I would love some feedback from you as well, if you have something similar in progress. So let's chat a little bit about compliance and conformance. When we chat about accessibility and we use the words compliance and conformance, there is a blurred line between them because they both aim to make experiences accessible for all. However, they have some difference. When I think about compliance, I think it is a strict commitment to accessibility standards. It's based on local, state, and federal laws. On the other hand, conformance, it's formal or informal commitment to accessibility standards in a voluntary way. So let's think about compliance as something that is mandatory and required, and conformance is something that is voluntary. Also, the way that I like to think about conformance, we can notice that we have form inside conformance. When you look at the origin of the word conformance, we see that we have the Latin suggestion that it's formare, that it's a figurative way to say form. And form means shape, how to modify something. And I like to translate that how to educate people, how to shape people. We can set our accessibility standards tailored to our users. We can shape it. We can conform, thinking about form that goes beyond compliance. Speaking of laws and compliance requirements, it comes to my mind two things. One is the ADA, the American with Disabilities Act, that it's a federal law that mandates employers, government agencies, and businesses to provide universal accessibility. This is the law that protects the civil rights of people with disabilities in many aspects of their life. And we have the Section 508, that is a United States federal law that brings the same requirements to federal government agencies. And the Section 508 standards apply to the accessibility of information and communication technology. It means it includes digital experience. The EDA, I would say that it's much broader than the Section 508 because it also applies to private and public sectors, and it also advocates for equal employment opportunities and also cares about accessibility in the physical space. But these are like the United States laws. But in addition to those laws, like there are many other laws on accessibility. They have been introduced at the federal, state, and local levels. And many of those regulations, they mention WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. In the addition to the WCAG, that is a global set of recognized guidelines for accessibility, we have many countries and many other laws, like across the globe. Accessibility is a global need. Everybody, no matter where you are, you need to care about accessibility. Any public website in the United States failing to comply with ADA or Section 508 are excluding users, and it is subject to lawsuits. In 2017, the Section 508 was revised to mandate that agents comply with WCAG guidelines. We have level A and double A that started on that amendment to the law. But we're going to get to the level shortly. In general, a person with a disability should have access to the same information and resources that are available to everybody else. We are all people. Let's chat about compliance levels. I like to say, hey, we think about a bunch of A's. We won't go too deep on that because I chatted about levels, I think, on my previous talk, and a bunch of other amazing folks are talking about the levels. But let's say that it's pretty much a scale. We have the A, that is the minimal bar. It's easier to achieve, and it's not going to cause like a lot of impact on the website. You can do that. We have the double A, that it's the level that it's legally required for most of the websites. And we have the triple A, that is the highest standard. It means we have more strict set of guidelines and benchmarks. Making a website legally accessible typically means that we are like achieving these double A standards. And as we mentioned, the WCAG guidelines is recognized across like many countries, such as Canada, Japan, Germany, United States, Australia, India, and many, many other, like even Brazil. We are talking a lot about accessibility lately. As we know, when we fail compliance, it can get us to lawsuits. So we have millions of reasons to be accessible. But when I say millions, besides thinking about inclusive design, I want us to think about money too, which is very important. On this slide, I'm showing 4 examples of accessibility lawsuits. I won't go through each one of them. I added a link to this slide that it's whoisaccessible.com that you can go and find information about each one of the lawsuits. But I wanted to highlight the Target example here. In 2006, Target was sued because blind people, they could not access the information on their website, and they could even complete purchase independently. So in 2018, Target was required to pay $6 million, $6 million, and make their website accessible to people with disabilities. Besides that, besides paying the $6 million, they also needed to commit to monitor their website for 3 years and to train all the engineers to develop accessible experience for the users. Again, you can learn more by checking the link on the slide. There are more examples besides Target. Accessibility.com reported over 2,000 website lawsuits in 2023. I was impressed. I was expecting more, to be honest, but it's still a lot if you think about the amount of people like failing and being sued regarding digital accessibility. And guess what? 69% of them came out of New York and California, where I am right now. I'm located in California. The numbers, they had a 4% drop comparing with 2022. But let's not get distracted by this. We still have a lot to do, and we can do much better. Now that we shared a little bit about laws and why WCAG, like that WCAG, also it's part of the law, they use that as the standard. Let's go to the conformance side. If your website doesn't conform, you will miss out the opportunity to create an accessible design, but you won't pay fines. Conformance, as I mentioned before, it's a voluntary thing. However, conforming to accessibility guidelines supports avoiding potential lawsuits because you're going to eventually be complying with the accessibility levels, the A's that I just mentioned. By making your design conform with accessibility, you can build better relationship with your users, reduce development costs, include more people in your design, improve the SEO and engagement, improve your website product reputation, and think about it. There are a bunch of clients out there, business partners, that they care about accessibility. If your product is accessible, they will probably be happy to partner with you in a business case because you have a good reputation. You're caring about accessible and inclusive design. It's a win. As designers, we have the power to influence the success of our product. Making our website accessible will help our company to avoid lawsuits, but it will also ensure that individuals, they have access to content and service. Again, accessibility is always a win. I wanted to share an example that we have on Gestalt. On Gestalt, we have a checklist for designers to use when designing a new workflow, but for us, from the Gestalt team, we use the checklist to create a new component or to write a new documentation. I'm showing how it looks like on the right side of the slide. It is a Figma component that is a checklist. Some of the things that we check, I'm not going to read this all because we check a bunch of things. It's based on the WCAG AA standards. But basically, we want to make sure that we have a semantic heading structure, we have a logical tab order. We also wanted to think about the links. We're not using generic words such as learn more, click here. We wanted to have meaningful labels. We wanted to think about the font size. Also, when you zoom the screen, is that too pixelated? Can people still see what is out there? Also, how are the gestures? How is like the touch tap area, the target area? We wanted to make sure that we check for those things before we publish a component or before we launch something new. Tim Berners-Lee, the web's inventor, says the semantic web language at its heart is very simple. It is just about the relationship between things. Let's talk about relationship. We just had the Valentine's Day. It's a good time to chat about relationship. But let's think, when you navigate through your product using assistive technology, let's say a screen reader, do the content relationship, does the reading order make sense to you? Is it simple enough for your user to understand? Sometimes we just think about visual experience, but we have screen readers, we have keyboard navigation, we have so many other types of assistive technology. We need to think about the relationship of the content and how our user engages with the content that we are offering. A lot of folks here speaking at AXCON, they already shared how accessibility goes beyond solving for disability. And if we think about accessibility, it also affects less favored people and it promotes inclusive design. We need to consider gender, race, different cultural backgrounds. For example, One example that I like to think of, when you reduce motion, you're not only solving for folks with vestibular motion disorders, but you're also thinking of people with slow internet connection. They can't load complex like animations. So you're solving for two cases, not only for disability. On this slide, I have a line illustration from the Microsoft Inclusive Toolkit, and it shows a wide range of people to convey the diversity of users. By the way, I love the Microsoft Inclusive Toolkit. If you never check it out. It's super cool and it has amazing resources. Back to the compliance thing that we're chatting and the conformance. Accessibility compliance doesn't always mean to be usable or even accessible. On this slide, I'm showing an image of a Braille sign located above at the very top of the elevator door, make it impossible to reach by hand. It follows the law because it's providing the Braille alternative for physical space, but it fails to support users because they can't physically touch that. It's too tall. It's impossible. I saw this photo other day when I was browsing on my LinkedIn. It was posted by Daniel Devesa. And I was like, oh, it gives us a great example. And it explains the difference between compliance and conformance. On the compliance side, we gotta follow the law. But on the conformance side, it's essential to follow the law, but it's most important to know how to apply the law to actually benefit people. So how could I do that different? Does this design conform or does it comply with accessibility guidelines? It's something for us to think about. So let's chat about a framework, something that I have been working recently. It's still a work in progress, but why this framework? Pinterest's mission is to bring everyone the inspiration to create a life they love. But when we say everyone, we must ensure that all users that comes to Pinterest, they can access what we create, regardless of their background, knowledge base, or ability. Since part of my work at Gestalt on the design system team is to consider accessibility and extend it to our product, not only to the design systems, we need to think, does my design conform with WCAG accessibility guidelines, or does it comply? Why it matters? Can I go AAA instead? What is the trade-off between usability and accessibility? On this next slide, I'm showing a GIF of the main character of the Disney movie Wish. It's called Daystar. Daystar is doing a happy dance. Why? Because accessible experience, they should make our users happy. So I think about a happy dance when I see that we're like meeting accessibility guidelines and standards. For now, I'm calling this framework Cintra's framework. I need a better name for that because it's still a proposal to drive Pinterest accessibility roadmap in the next years. So the name will probably change. But why do I need a framework? We often struggle deciding about the level of accessibility commitment to apply because we don't have a centralized accessibility team today. We have passionate folks across the organization that they care about accessibility. We have accessibility working group, but we don't have a team to drive accessibility today. And since we are the design system team, we are the foundation of our product, we kind of feel that it's our duty to provide a framework and to support other teams to improve accessibility and to scale accessibility from the design system side. What is special about this framework is that it focuses on the conformance to achieve compliance. We need to think in our users' need rather than just complying. And the phases of this framework are understand, engage, iterate, and scale. Let's go to the phase so I can explain a little better. When we think about understand, what is my product maturity level regarding accessibility? Who are my users? What are my user and my business needs? Because we need to think on both, right? We need to satisfy our users, but we also need to think about the money side, and we need to think about the business goal. The goal of this phase is to educate and gather information to make accessibility part of the design process. We got to document it all. For example, we can do audits, like think about the interactions, the patterns, the structure, the visual design, the content, how they comply and how they conform with WCAG guidelines. We need to evaluate the tools. Do we have any let's say, a plugin that we can use on the design side? What are like the dev tools that we have for checking for accessibility? Should we invest on new tools? Should we do training? What do we have to apply accessibility on the product? And dialogue. We don't know everything. We don't know all the teams because we don't work closely with everybody on the company. So dialogue, learn from others, get insights. And the last step of each pillar, it's focused on the users. I'm trying to connect this part of the framework to the Pinterest value to make it unique to Pinterest. So when you see put pinners first, it is a Pinterest value that tied to the users. And when we say pinners, pinners is how we call Pinterest users. So we wanted to make sure understanding accessibility ties to the user needs. They need to come first. They need to go beyond compliance. We need to think, how can we make things work to the final user? One example that I wanted to give here, like very quickly, is thinking about color contrast. We know that we are required by law when you look at the AGA, if we compare AGA section 508 with the WCAG guidelines, it's pretty set the contrast ratio that we need to achieve for contrast. And it's easy to achieve if we pay attention to that. But let's say when we are like meeting color contrast, we also think about colorblind users, because it's not necessarily the contrast, but how are we differentiating the colors so people, they can still see the content, especially if we need to rely on colors. Can we make sure, like, we shouldn't be relying on colors, but if we have a colored graph, how people with colorblind vision, they see that? We don't have that explicitly, like telling on the law how to deal with that, but it's something that we need to go beyond the law to solve, because it does impact lives. So we wanted to make sure that we account for that. Then we have the engage phase of the framework. It means that accessibility is everyone's responsibility, so we gotta engage with everyone in different teams to make accessibility part of the process. From the design system side, we're like thinking about contributions. When we invite people to contribute to the design systems and we chat with cross-functional teams, because our components are accessible and we care about accessibility from the design system side, it extends to other teams. They will learn about accessibility as well. And how do we build a community of accessibility advocates? Can we share the same vision? How do we get supporters? Are we thinking about feedback loops? Are we conducting usability tests? I know that not everybody can conduct usability tests. It's not available for everybody, but maybe you can run experiments and get some insight. Oh, is that feature working? Is that accessible enough? Am I getting like a good sample of users, like a diverse sample that I can test my design? And one thing that is very important, it's not only the engagement within the company, but how you engage with the community out there. We are all a community. When we chat with each other, like with accessibility professionals, oh, I think I saw a talk from you. I saw you other day on the conference. We are all connected. We learn a lot from each other, and it helps us to get more allies and on Pinterest, for example, we do internal conference every year that we invite people from other design systems team, from other features team to talk about accessibility and to show how good they are doing so it can inspire us to do better. So community is super important. And another value for Pinterest is creating belonging, but thinking about our users, how is the relationship of my product with my user? Do they feel part of the product? Am I creating belonging? We need to think about the unique needs from our users. I wanted to share one example of a tool that my teammates they created to contribute to make accessibility as part of the design process. On this slide, I'm showing the star Disney character dancing again, because again, we need to celebrate any accessibility efforts that we have. We have a plugin at Pinterest that it's called Pinterest Design Figma plugin. We are trying to add text contrast and the accessibility checklist that I shared before as part of the plugin. We are still like refining this tool, but we are thinking, is that a way that we can create some kind of linter that checks for accessibility inside our design files? So within the design files, people, they can run the plugin and it can help them to improve accessibility. It's something that we are trying to refine and to improve on Pinterest, but is it some kind of tool that we can use and we can come up with, who knows, to improve accessibility? And then we have the iterate phase, that is the third phase of the framework. When we say iterate, what I like to point out is be like transparent, be real, and try and try and try. For example, share the wins, but also share the learning. I like to say when we fail, we are not actually failing, we are learning from what we just got. So people, they can learn when you share, oh, I did something good and it reduced the amount of accessibility bugs. You can do the same. Share the things that you're doing in your team to inspire other teams to do the same. Refine the resources and tools that you have. Try to eliminate bugs, apply the feedback that you get, test the user flows, like maybe the components, they are accessible and you're like, oh, I'm using the components, they're accessible, but the way that you use the component, the user flow, maybe it's not accessible. So you have the opportunity to iterate your design to make sure that it is complying with WCAG, but you are also thinking on specific user needs. One example, we had other day a designer who came to us and they had like very, very tiny icons and like the target area was enough. But by looking at the design, it felt so small, the space between each one of the icons. And we were saying like, hey, can we increase the space a little bit so people, they have more room to tap between each menu icon? And they're like, oh, but we are meeting WCAG. This is the minimal target area. Okay, this is the minimal, but can we iterate to see if we can go a little bit more and see how it behaves? So maybe it's better for mobility. So we need to think, what are our users need? Maybe they don't need that, but we should provide options to evaluate what is better for our users. And when possible, try to perform tests, do manual tests besides automation tests, use assistive technology, play with the screen reader. It gives you a lot of insight that because you're not a regular user, you don't have them. So it's very important to experience and try different tools. And when you learn, like learn from your users too. Maybe you had an assumption and this user brought a different perspective. So use that as a learn for you. The last one is the scale. How can we scale accessibility within our organization? In our case, having folks adopting components will improve accessibility in our product because our components, they have accessibility baked in and they are used everywhere in our surface. When you access Pinterest, you're going to see a bunch of components reusable like across the whole surface. So if people, they use our components, they're creating accessibility at least on the component side of the force. In our case, we try to increase the percentage of components adoption across Pinterest, so we can also increase accessibility across design. But let's say you're not part of a design system team. You can still reach out to design systems teams and advocate for accessibility as part of the components. And if you don't have a design system team, you can create one day, why not? Let's say that you work for a company that already meets or it's close to meet the AA standards. You can still use this framework to go beyond compliance and to think, how can I be more conformant with accessibility WCAG guidelines? How can I shape and form my standards to fit my user needs? And think about another Pinterest value that I'm adding here is act as one. We need to act as one, not only inside the company, but we need to think in general. When we are creating accessible design, we are also creating inclusive design. And we will also need inclusive design at some point of our lives. We are like creating experiences that are better for everybody, not just for Pinterest, but for everybody. You can extend that to many. And how do we plan to use this framework when we think about understand, engage, iterate, and scale accessibility efforts and support inclusive design? At Pinterest, we are trying to use the framework striving to meet the highest level of accessibility standards we can, but we also want to go beyond compliance. We don't want it to get stuck just on the laws. We want it to do better and think about our user needs. One thing that we are doing, we are trying to research accessibility for mobile products because we know WCAG sometimes it's not very comprehensive on the mobile side. So we got to do our job and learn how can we make experience better? How can we go beyond WCAG and so for mobile? We need to understand accessibility for a visual platform like Pinterest. If you use Pinterest, you know that it's super visual, but what about the non-visual users? How should we do going forward? We have an open source library that is Gestalt. It's open to you if you wanted to check it out. It has accessible components. We try our best to meet accessibility standards there, so we can extend that to the product. We also have the inclusion and diversity teams that we partner with them to help them to scale accessibility. We have an accessibility week page. We have an ERG that it's called Pinable. So as part of the design systems team, because we care about accessibility, we wanted to make sure that we join the accessibility ERG so we can learn from others. And we also have an accessibility channel on Slack that we share insights. Because we don't have decentralized team, we can ask each other questions and we can come together and work in something that benefits everybody. Mm-hmm. And as a product designer working on the design system team, as I said earlier, we have the power to influence. No matter your team, you also have the power to influence. Even if you're not part of the design system team, if you're a feature design, you're still a design system user. Look, you use components. So these are some of the things that we do using the Gestalt influence to extend to the product and to conform with WCAG guidelines. We define a minimal bar. In our case, we are like also AA, but sometimes we question among ourselves, hey, does it make sense to go AAA here? If we can, why not? But I would say it's better for you to care on meeting like low standards, like as much as you can, instead of focusing on one big thing to meet like a very high standard. They're like baby steps. Try like small and you're gonna reach better standards as we evolve. We also have accessibility as part of DON, as a definition of DON. We don't publish any component if it's not accessible. We do have old components that are there for a while that they have some accessibility issues that we're like committing to fix them now. We also try to motivate accessibility and inclusive design best practices. We wanted to provide accessibility tools to help designers to understand WCAG guidelines. We are trying to make accessibility part of the design handoff. So we wanted to make sure that our engineers, they are set to build accessible experience and we don't fail on the design side. And we wanted to stimulate contribution because, again, when we contribute to each other, we are also educating people on accessibility, especially coming from the design system side. I wanted to show a quick example. On this slide, I'm showing a screenshot of the navigation bar in our design system website and highlighting our accessibility page. We added some design considerations, engineering considerations, and we have internal and external resource to support teams designing accessible experience. For example, for the design side, we have visual design, interactions, content, responsiveness, guidelines. On the engineering side, we have considerations such as like ARIA attributes, labels, keyboard navigation, tests, manual tests, automated tests. So this is some kind of resource that people can rely on today to learn about inclusive and accessibility at Pinterest. On this next screen, I'm showing a screenshot of Gestalt's components accessibility scorecard. We have a designer, she is awesome. Her name is Kate Halvarsen. She works with me. She created this scorecard, and the goal for the scorecard is to align our components with the WCAG inclusive principles. Ideally, all components, they need to be visually accessible, they need to be screen reader compatible, they need to be navigable, operable, and understandable. By following the inclusive principles, we conform to the WCAG standards, but we can go way beyond. We don't need to stop there. Just quickly, I'd like to show you some numbers. Since 2021, our design system team has built over 100 components across platform teams. And this number, I believe it's even bigger now. And we also trained over 600 designers and engineers on accessibility. Last year, we improved 9% in product accessibility enhancements. It's not a high number, but our goal is to go high as we evolve on accessibility. And how we all can do that? Follow process, learn the web standards, the W3C standards. You can also check WCAG guidelines, learn about the ARIA attributes that you can do, learn about all the accessibility tools that you have available for free, or maybe if you have some budget, what you can achieve for your company to comply and also to conform with accessibility. Think about a team. In our case, the design system team is doing a lot to address accessibility, but right now we are hoping to hire somebody to help us as well to maintain accessibility at Pinterest. So maybe you can do something similar. Think about resource, educate yourself. Take a look on the WCAG checklist and the accessibility checklist from WebAIM as well. Speaking of training, I just wanted to share quickly the WC program. They have a free accessibility course that you can take and get a certificate to improve your skills as a designer and think about accessibility. DQ University, they have lots and lots of content. I take them myself, even to refresh my mind because we don't know everything. And it's super cool. I encourage you to check it out. We also have the certifications, the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. They have many types of certifications that you can get. And I'm hoping that I can come back here in the future to teach you how to get a certification, different certifications from this. So I really encourage you to check it out. And final considerations. Accessibility conformance is essential regardless of a legal mandate. You as a design, you have the opportunity to create design that supports accessibility. WCAG conformance is voluntary, but proof of conformance is valuable to prove compliance with the ADA and other accessibility laws. And you can question business requirements which violate accessibility. It's your job to advocate for the user and demand accessible alternatives. If you have any idea that you could improve the product and make it more inclusive and accessible, go for it. You should do that. That's it. If you wanted to learn more about me, about my team, I added some links for you. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can take a look on the articles that I wrote. I also have an XCon talk from the last year, more about design systems and accessibility. I invite you to check it out if you want to. Thank you so much for attending this talk. I appreciate your time. If you are watching the recording later, I also wanted to thank you because we know that time is precious. So now I believe it's time for Q&A, so I'm gonna give it back to you, Michael.
I'm going to applaud Cynthia because we've got a lot of things in the chat. A lot of people in the chat wanted to thank you already for a lot of those sources that you've given us. So remember that the slide deck is available on the website, and so if those links that Cynthia put in those decks, you can get to pretty easy. And so we've got some questions lined up for Cynthia. And actually, the first question, Cynthia, is you mentioned in your presentation about testing your components with screen readers. And one of our users asked, if we're not native screen reader user, is it still advisable us to try to learn screen readers and to test with them? Or do we need to hire or contract a screen reader user to perform these tests for us? What are your thoughts on when you do screen read testing on your components? How is it someone that uses a screen reader all the time, or do you feel it's pretty good if you know how to test with the screen reader?
Yeah, this is a great question. I believe both ways are valid, like hiring somebody to do that for you and having users testing using screen readers, but you can also do that. The way that we do today on Gestalt with components, when you do the onboarding session for design systems and for designers, we do an accessibility training for designers, and part of this training is to teach them how to use the screen reader in your phone. And one of the things that we ask people that it's super interesting to see how it goes, we ask them like to do live during the training to open the screen reader on their phone. We teach on Android and iOS, and we ask them to go to Pinterest because we wanted to show how we're like sucking in some parts of the user flow, so we can motivate people to improve that and make us to look good on the screen reader. So we have Kate. She's one of our designers. She goes and teaches people how to use that. And what we heard from designers, it's like, hey, thank you so much for teaching me how to use that. I had no idea how my prototype was so bad. And I was using the screen reader. I found a lot of like traps, like focus traps on my design that now I have the material and the things that I need to do to fix that. So I think both are valid, but like you can also test and use like your phone to test your design. Or if you have that in your computer, like go for it. You can also do the test if you don't have ways to pay someone to do that for you.
It's cool because the way you talk through that, right? It's really a learning opportunity for you either way. That you can either do it yourself and say, I didn't know that, or have someone who's really has some expertise really dig into it and maybe find things that you might not realize from a user perspective. So thanks for that answer. Next question is, and this person, really it's about where to start, right? What would be a basic guideline of accessibility to introduce to a company that has no accessibility in space in place? So you've got this great resource in the Gestalt design system. Is there a best place to start if I'm just dipping my toe into that accessibility water?
Yeah, great question as well. I would say go to WCAG. they have a bunch of checklists on the ones that you have on Edwin, they have lots of design things that you can check on accessibility. But I would say don't worry too much about meeting every single check from the checklist. Like WebAIM, they have like a long checklist.
Mm-hmm.
Like try as much as you can. I like to say accessibility. Like of course we wanted to meet all the checklists, but they're like babe steps. You go small, and when you show somebody, hey, I improved the contrast, look how much more impressions I had on this design because the contrast is higher. You can prove why it's important. You can gather metrics to show why it's important to do small adjustments in your product, and you can motivate people to go deeper into the guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you start small, like start, let's say, on the design side, because most of the accessibility issues, they come from the design phase. If we start on the design side, you can extend that and go deeper to the levels as you go. And again, try to also think about your user. Like if you see something that it's not on the WCAG guidelines, but you think, oh, I did a usability test
Mm-hmm.
and I found my user is having difficult to touch this specific portion of the screen, maybe because it's too high, the placement is not great. This is not on the WCAG guidelines, but if you notice that from your user, you can go beyond and also make it part of the process to think about how your user interacts with that.
And I love that thought, Cynthia, because it's really thinking about, even when you think within the WCAG guidelines, thinking about the people who use your site, which is the whole reason we're building it. What can I make the greatest impact with? And maybe that's the first one I go to. For someone, it might be color contrast. For somebody else, it might be line sizing because they have a lot on their site. And I love how you took that approach just to think through that. And also, your comments always remind me of the famous quote about accessibility, about how it's about progress over perfection, right? So let's do something to move it forward, and eventually we'll get to do more and more. And I think watching your talk last year and then watching your talk being a part of your talk this year, right? It's that progress that you keep making in Pinterest and trying to push yourself and saying, how do we just continually get better in this space? Is definitely something that's it's fun to see. So you talked about this a little bit, and I think this is the last question we have time for, but how do you ensure that the users of Gestalt still conform to Ally standards? For example, keyboard traps. A designer can put together components from the design system, but might forget these little things that with the huge impact. How do you make sure that these components, when built together, still keep accessibility in mind?
Yeah, thanks so much for this question. I love it, this question because this is one of our biggest challenge today at Pinterest because we create the accessible components and we want people to use the components. We are trying to avoid like, hey, don't detach this component, don't break the code, because if you try to customize that in a wrong way, you will still like you mess with the accessibility, you mess with the styles. So we are trying to do a bunch of education on that sense to make sure that people they use the components as they are. But one thing that we created, we are not super proud of it, but at least we keep things under control. We have a page how to hack a Gestalt component in our documentation. But why we have that? Why we want people to hack the component? We don't want it, but if they do that in a way that it's accessible. We are not messing up with accessibility. So this is one thing that we try to do to control the accessibility side. But remember one thing that I mentioned on the talk, the final considerations.
Yep.
If we see something that is not accessible, report that. Talk to people like, hey, this is not accessible. We often act as the cops
Mhm.
of Pinterest. Like if we see some people using our component in a way that it's messing up with accessibility or it's causing trouble for our users, we try to reach out to them. and maybe like open a Jira ticket saying like, hey, this is failing quality
Yep.
because accessibility is part of quality. This is not accessible. Can we like provide a better quality, like meaning better accessibility as
Yeah.
well on this
Yep.
component? So keep advocating for accessibility, talk to people, dialogue. Maybe they break the component because they don't know how to do. It's not intentional because people they're still learning about accessibility. Not
Yep.
everybody knows everything.
Yep. And we're out of time, but I'm going to let you leave us, Cynthia, with your last thought. So, what final thought do you have for our attendees today in your session?
I would say think about, does my design conform or does it comply with accessibility? Thinking about, okay, I need to follow the law, but most importantly, I wanted to apply the law in a way that real benefits people. I'm not just like meeting like I'm not like just checking a checkbox, complying with the law, but I'm actually changing lives by providing accessible experience for real people. Yeah, think about that and try to go beyond compliance.
And I think that's so key. Thank you for sharing that with us. Yes, you are. You're changing lives. So thank you to everybody. Thank you for your time and your energy. We both hope that you enjoy the rest of your time here at AxCon and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.